long-suffering person who's in Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me on It's All Right with Suzette. I'm Suzette Martinez Standring, and today we're going to be talking about healing from the trauma of sexual and physical abuse. And our writer today is Christine Cissy White. She is a health activist, a mother, a writer, and the founder of Heal Right Now, WRITE. And she has published in the Boston Globe, in Health and Spirituality magazine, Ms. Magazine, and she has a blog, and she's a columnist for the Elephant Journal. So today we're going to talk about that very touchy subject of not only writing in order to recover from past trauma, but also the very personal process of sharing it with others in the hopes of healing people. So thank you so much for being with us today, Chrissy White.
Hello, it's so great to be here. I'm thrilled.
Sissy White, excuse me.
That's okay.
Now, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to this incredible mission and life purpose.
Well, I've always loved writing. Ever since I was 11, my mom got me my first journal. I started journal writing. And then when I became a reporter right out of high school, I did an internship at a newspaper, the Harvard Post, in this town we were growing up in. And I always loved writing, but I separated professional writing and just journal writing, which was my personal story. And I sort of kept them divided. And as I got older, I started melding them more and finding that incredibly healing. And I felt like there's so many people who aren't writers who could benefit from so much of what writing can do. It's not just a tool for writers. So
Yes.
that really made it become a passion and an activist thing. But honestly, until I was older, I wasn't comfortable because it was so much of my own story was why I was doing it, and I wasn't comfortable sharing that until I was a little more established professionally.
Can you tell us a little bit about, the trauma that you have experienced that you bring to this really important mission of helping others to heal?
Sure. The new phrase is developmental trauma, and that's trauma that happens while you're developing. And it's a little bit different than what people think of as post-traumatic stress disorder or single incident or adult onset trauma, because it's happening recurring. And there's trauma and neglect happening during childhood, during development. So the new thinking is there's sometimes different symptoms than post-traumatic stress disorder, although they overlap because the trauma is happening during developmental stages. So for me, that took the form of abuse, which I think a lot of people understand as being traumatic, physical and sexual abuse, but it also was neglect. My father was an alcoholic, my biological father. He left when I was an infant, went to Vietnam, so he was absent. There was a lot of moving and chaos, and the things that are very common for trauma but are the less talked about aspects, just neglect and chaos.
Neglect, abandonment, and I know that you had admitted in your blog that there was sexual abuse from your stepfather.
My stepfather, stepsister, and stepbrother. So they lived with us all together for a period of time. My mother was 19 and she married my stepfather, who was 46 at the time. His children were much older. My mother already had 2 kids, and so he and 2 of his children were abusive.
I think that this subject is so important because in many ways it's difficult for people to come forward and talk about their experiences, in the fear that people will see them as damaged goods, or just the shame associated with it. And one of the beautiful things that I found on your blog is that you had talked about how when you were getting older, how you yearned for a role model of someone who had gone through what you had gone through and was now normal, that had normal relationships, had happy family relationships, that could have a normal sex life and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that journey, trying to find someone like that and becoming that role model?
Absolutely. I mean, one way I think about it is, people talk a lot about breaking the cycle. Well, if the trauma happened in a family setting, you never stop being related to your family. So when you start college or a job or a marriage or parenting, you don't necessarily want to refer back to the way it happened in your family. So your mentors, your own mentors, are not necessarily going to be the elders in your family. They love you, you love them, but if there's been trauma, likely they've had it too on some level, and there's some dysfunction. So that is very difficult. You're trying to keep connected with family that you love, but then you're trying to learn new information that you can't get inside of your family.
Yes.
So you need other places to get that. And while it's great to have therapy and professional resources, some of what women and men need is just to be able to talk to other people who have a similar situation, who figured some things out, who have some tools, and just having a community of people that you're sharing with. So you can say, what do you do if you don't want to do spanking? You don't want to repeat certain things, but you're not really sure what an appropriate boundary is when you're raising your own child. And you want to talk to someone that knows why it's complicated in this specific way. And that's really lacking in our society, and that keeps it secret, and that keeps people, at a play group not talking about what their own issues are, about co-sleeping, tantrums, because it might push on all your old stuff, but you're keeping all that secret. And that just makes life more difficult. And that's not about what happened in the past. That makes this life now more difficult because you're keeping what really is happening for me. I'm keeping that secret, and I'm just trying to go along with happy conversation. But we all yearn to be real.
Yes. I mean, earlier you and I talked about how there is the misunderstanding among many people that they feel that if something happened to you at, say, 4 or 5, that the person, the victim at the time, can't get over it.
Yeah.
But that's not the case. It's how it keeps bubbling up in the present as, say, sharing holidays together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think people have this idea that, I know many trauma survivors, and we never are sitting together talking about what happened to you when you were 6, what happened to you when you were 6. What we're talking about is, oh my gosh, what do I do now? The holidays are coming up. It's Mother's Day. It's Father's Day. There is no card in the Mother's Day or Father's Day store that's really appropriate. You have relationships, core relationships, but the cultures, some of the things don't fit. And so you're talking to other people about oh, this is a hard day, or I just don't know how to acknowledge or celebrate this day. It's not a celebratory day, or pieces of it are, and other pieces aren't. Or, all right, I want to go home on Christmas Eve, but that house might have memories. That house might be a trigger for trauma memories.
Or seeing the person.
Or seeing the person if they're still related. You don't stop if you have developmental trauma, you don't stop having a relationship to the people that traumatized you unless you completely stop having a relationship. And even that, you want to be able to talk to other people about the decisions to how much contact to have, how much contact not to have, how much to talk about publicly or not talk about, how much to be respectful of other people's feelings while owning your own truth. There are things we all deal with on some level, but when it's traumatic, it's sensitive. And so you might have some anxiety that goes with these complicated things, or you might have a nightmare or sleeplessness, and you want to talk to other people about that. And that's where writing can be great. You can write some of those feelings that you feel in the present about things that are complicated by the past, but you're not constantly going back to the past. It's the past that's complicating your present, and you're trying to find a way to not let it be so much in your present that you're not enjoying what else is beautiful now.
In your blog, you make the comment that you have to learn to love yourself. Right? You have to learn to love yourself so that you can believe that you are truly lovable to other people. So, we have about 5 minutes, but can you talk about how you came to that place of loving yourself?
Yeah, I call it self-care as a second language. And I say it's not intuitive. If you have been raised in a setting where people are ignoring needs, wants, feelings, safety, for lots of reasons,
Yes.
usually having to do with, people have had their own wants, needs, safety.
Yes.
So learning how to sort of mama your trauma.
Mama your trauma.
Yeah.
I love that.
And it's like learning how to be a parent to yourself. You have to sort of learn that, okay, the way I speak to my friends, I need to speak that way to myself. Most trauma survivors that I know speak to themselves the way their parents spoke to them. So there can be a big disconnect, a very critical internal voice from a person that wouldn't even kill a mosquito in the real world, in practice.
Yes.
And so you sort of have to treat yourself the way you treat other people instead of keeping that critical voice going. And for me, that has been the most helpful thing. Also becoming a parent, my daughter was adopted, she was born in China, so I learned a ton about attachment parenting, which that helped me realize relationships are crucial, attachment is crucial. It's not the presence of bad, it's the absence of good that causes damage, and you need to fill in all the good. Instead of focusing so much on what didn't happen, you want to fill in everything you didn't get, because that's so that could be the good part of healing.
Yes,
that's the fun part.
And I think that a lot of parents, regardless of trauma or not, are very much aware of what they didn't receive in their childhoods, and they're trying to make it up through their own children.
Yep.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we can all use a little more love in our lives. And I think that the whole concept of the inner child, where has been long neglected, very critical inner voice, and you as the adult speaking in a new self-caring way for that inner child, bringing her out again, can be very, very healing.
Absolutely, and everyone can do it. It's something you can start to do and see results in fairly quickly. That's the good news.
Yes. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking to Christine Cissy White about the very personal experience of writing about things that are so painful and sharing those things publicly, and how she does it. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining us on It's All Right with Suzette. Well, we're back. So thanks for tuning in. I'm Suzette Martinez Standring, and we're returning now to Christine Cissy White, the founder of Heal Right Now. So one of the big things when writing about personal trauma, especially when it involves physical or sexual abuse, is how far do you go in your writing? I mean, you mentioned your stepbrother, your stepsister, your stepfather, and there are many people out there who want to write, but they're afraid because they think, oh, well, you know who that is. What advice would you give to people who want to write and possibly blog about that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think you have to follow your own heart, but also, I mean, there are legal implications. If you are blogging or writing about somebody, and you know, it is a legal risk. So some people, you know, if they're naming someone on your own blog site, like I got a lawyer when I started blogging, and the lawyer said, you know, it's fine what you're saying, but if somebody can prove that it's not true what you're saying, you know, then there's a legal issue. Well, for me, I know what I was saying was true, but there are legal issues involved.
Do you name names?
I actually haven't named names, but I haven't. I think I've named first names.
Okay. First real names.
Yes, first real names.
Okay.
But it is the most important thing I would say to people is write your story for yourself first. Write what you need to say first, and publishing to me is always secondary. To me, the writing process is incredibly healing, and the most valuable thing it is healthful. And then you may choose to publish, and I have published a lot, and I am grateful because I've met wonderful other writers and activists. But it's really mostly for personal health, and and that's available to anybody. It's not just to writers. So it's like the secret writers have about how great writing is and how great it can make you feel. And a lot of people are terrified of writing, and they don't know that that's accessible to them, even if they never want to publish or share it with anybody. So there are many people that I've met that feel like they can't even write their truth in a journal, that they would shred the pages. They're afraid to say that. And I would say start there first, and then worry later about publishing. I mean, Anne Lamott, who we both love, she says things about, if you wanted me to write better about you, you should have treated me better. And she puts the onus on the other person.
Well, that's right.
She says that
That's
I
right.
own my experiences, and I have the right to write about my own experiences. That said, I have a sister who's a year older than me. She does not love that I am so out in the world. It's not that she doesn't know about our lives, but she has her own perspectives, and she doesn't necessarily love thinking about it or talking about it or having people know about it. And I would be lying if I said I didn't sometimes feel bad, or that wasn't complicated, or not something I've had to constantly check with myself, like, do I have a right to do that, or is the bigger good, more important, which I feel it is. But it's tricky because not everyone's going to feel the same way about our choices.
Yes. Now, you mentioned Anne Lamott, who I love. I've read about pretty much all her books, and you mentioned to me earlier that she retweeted a column that you wrote last month.
About her.
Oh, yes.
So it was, honestly, she's one of my role models. And when I started listening to her, she was writing about her son, Sam, way back in Operating Instructions.
Yes.
And
right, I read that book.
Oh my God, she's one of the most honest writers. She was so truthful. She was
funny, honest, poignant, very pointed.
Yep. And so when she's one of my favorite writers. So when she retweeted something I wrote, I felt like I won megabucks. I was like, her eyeballs were on my words, because my eyes have been on hers for so long, and I've quoted her and I've underlined both things that she said. So yeah, it was a total writer's high.
And speaking of that, which makes me think about when you're writing, especially when you're writing and attempting to be very brave, how the influence of other very candid writers can empower you. And so it sounds like Annie Lamott had that effect on you, and in turn, you're trying to make it safe and role model how writing toward recovery is effective and how you do it.
And it's so humanizing. I think writers also know that in pop culture on Facebook, you have to be so happy all the time and smiley, and no one's putting pictures of, like, the cat being sick or your kid. It's all the happy stuff. But writers know you have to put everything in, or it's not believable. You have to write about everything and truthfully, or else it's not going to make good writing.
It's true.
Excuse me.
It's
true.
People
like Anne Lamott, for me, have given me permission. Like, you have to go there. You have to be brave. The things that you're afraid to say are the things people need to hear the most. And I know for me, Nick Flynn wrote Another Bullshit Night in Suck City about his homeless alcoholic father. And I thought, I've never met someone else who had a homeless alcoholic father. I read that book. I loved it. Other people, I was so happy when I read the book. It is not a happy book, but the feeling of being connected, of somebody knowing your experience, finding words, thinking thoughts you've thought and never heard anyone say, it feels so good. And that's what I think a lot of people who have developmental trauma who can benefit from in writing, is that you can get that community and that camaraderie, and that just, like, this stuff happens to people that you don't get anywhere else. And that is so healing. It doesn't always have to be in, like, a therapy setting, which can be more serious and it's all problems. It's like, just some of these stories are funny and weird and wacky.
Like David Sedaris. I love him.
Yes.
I love him, where he talks about his dysfunctional family, and suddenly you can relate on so many different levels. Maybe it's not your exact circumstance, but it is healing to find connection, to relate. Now, for those people who are maybe not writers but have thought about it for a long time, because I do teach writing workshops, and I often encounter, I'm a little afraid to open up that can of worms. What's going to happen to me if I confront it? Can you explain a little bit about the experience of recovery while writing?
Absolutely.
How does that work? What does it feel like? What steps do you have to take?
Well, it's funny. James Pennebaker did some research in the late 80s, and James Pennebaker out of University of Texas, and he talks about the healing power of writing. You only need to write 4 days in a row for 10 to 20 minutes in an expressive style writing, which means the pen doesn't come off the page, sort of like Nancy Sloan Maroney and Natalie Goldberg teach. The pen doesn't come off the page. You don't censor yourself. You don't edit. You just write what's coming out from a feeling place, not what you're thinking sounds smart or good or is grammatically correct. You're just writing from a feeling place. That style of writing causes T-cell count to go up in people. It improves immune function. It improves sleeping, wound healing. So I try to tell people, you're carrying the impact of your past. Writing helps you release it. It is not that you're going to bring stuff up. It is in you. So writing lets you get it out. And Nancy Arney, I took a workshop with her, and she always says, write it out of the body. Write it right out of the body. And that is part of the reason I think people feel better after they do it. Now, it's not that nothing upsetting will come up, but we already know what happened. We already lived it. And so to be able to express it and to get it on the page, even if you don't show it to anyone, has those health benefits. I personally believe that if you sit in a safe circle and are hearing other people share similar things, I believe that increases the healing effect. But it's not necessary. People can do it alone, by themselves, in total private, and get some physical health benefits. So I would encourage people to think of it as a healthful practice, just like you don't have to be a Olympian to benefit from running. You don't have to be a writer to benefit from the practice of writing.
Mm-hmm. Now, the experience of being a survivor in your journey, does there come a point, obviously for you, there has come a point where you now feel empowered, and that's in the past. And you ask those questions in your blog, sharing your development in this. Are there people out there who have fully recovered? Are there people who have happy and normal relationships on every aspect, right? And do you feel you've reached that?
I feel like we're all constantly evolving. And I think, to be honest, part of the reason I didn't share and write more publicly in my younger years was I felt like I don't have a right to say anything until every part of my life is great. And then I was like, well, that's not really true for anybody. You might have your work life is going great, but your personal life, you might have your financial life is going great, but there's your parenting, you're having issues. Like, we're all constantly evolving on everything, and the past does bubble up. So I expect for me, I'll have post-traumatic stress for my whole life, but it doesn't mean I'm suffering in agony with symptoms every day. I will revisit it, and it comes up. And for me, that's when I have to turn to writing, yoga, friends, my healing practices, because it does have a lifelong impact, I believe. And that's, I believe, a reality. And for me, dealing with that reality is hopeful, because it says this is just how it is. It's like a chronic condition, and it can be managed, and we can live a full life. People who are survivors go in and out of, struggles just like everybody else. And losses and stress may be more exacerbated for trauma survivors because you're sensitive to those extremes. Your nervous system is sensitive to those extremes. But we can have a life. We do have a life. And when we find each other, it is wonderful, because there are so many of us, and most of the time we're invisible to one another. And just the fact that we know we're not is so
That's
healing.
true, because just to meet you today, and you are so vibrant and interested and interesting. One would never guess that kind of trauma had happened in your life. And I would think that a major obstacle for many who are on the survivor's journey is trust. And tell me how learning to love yourself more, how does that play into overcoming trust issues with others?
That's a good question. I think it's I wish I could say it was a faster process. It's definitely a slower process, because if your own family members, not all of them, of course, we all have good and bad in our family, including trauma survivors. If your own family wasn't able to meet your needs, it's hard to trust that other people will as you're growing up. But then the more you realize you can meet your own needs, you're not in a dependent state. You can rely on yourself. Then you realize, and then you can take risks and get the benefit and beauty of interdependence with other people. But you have yourself, you have your own back. At least for me, that has helped me be more brave to risk relationships of any kind, or even doing things like this, you know, like I'll be okay no matter what. Like I'll be okay. So that helps you be brave. And, you know, that takes a little work to get there.
Well, tell us, how can we find you? Tell us the name of your blog and
Sure.
where you write, and you know, how long have you been doing your blog and going public with your writing?
Sure. Well, I've been a writer since I was 18, so it's been decades, but Heal right now is 18 months old. It's fairly new. I've just started since in my 40s, right, sort of, I said, coming out as a trauma survivor and signing my names to articles and writing specifically about sexual violence and developmental trauma, because I feel like breaking the silence and breaking the cycle are related. So you can break the cycle of violence just by telling the truth about your story. You don't necessarily just to yourself, telling yourself the truth, you know, in a journal.
Yeah.
And then if you want to go forward, but if you're telling yourself the truth, it's easier to have relationships with other people and then consider whether or not you want to tell that in you know, your more intimate circles, and then perhaps on a blog. For me, I love blogging, but I don't sit around when I meet people at cocktail parties. I don't talk about this. In writing, I can be intimate, and this allows me this space to write my deepest, innermost feelings. But I mean, you know, that allows me to be more lighthearted in every other part of my life. So I feel like writing, I can write as heavy as I want, as deeply and honestly, which I do on my blog, and I try to be very honest. But then I still have to make coffee and shovel just like everybody else and get through the day, and you know, and and you can say things in writing.
Right.
That's what I love about writing. You know, we can talk and share at a depth in writing that we just don't normally do conversationally, except with very few people.
That's true. That's true. And I like what you are sharing on your blog, in that this is what happened to me. This is not who I am.
Yep. Yep.
And because who you are, your personality, your spirit, that's in the forefront. And it is in the forefront because you've been able to put it in its place, to put the responsibility on those people who are responsible for it, not yourself as a participant.
Right, and I think that's hard for a lot of people because, you know, look at the women who, with Bill Cosby and everything that happened, you know, we put a lot of shame on the people who survive and speak up. And we don't hold it culturally. We don't hold perpetrators, alleged perpetrators and perpetrators, known perpetrators. We don't hold them responsible often. We blame people for being affected rather than we blame people for being violent. And to me, we're not going to change the culture unless we change that up. And that's another reason that writing is a form of activism as well as personal healing.
And so your website is Heal Right Now, and you write for the Elephant Journal.
I do. I blog for the Elephant Journal.
What is the Elephant Journal for the viewers?
Elephant Journal is a fabulous place for all things to do with the mindful life. So they're fabulous on all things healing, food, nutrition, environment. They're a great online platform.
What's their website?
Theirs is www.elephantjournal.com. And they're great. And then, and I am working on a book with Nancy Sloan-Maroney about the impact of developmental trauma.
Yes, I know. And the proposed title of that book is Your Childhood is Making You Fat, Sick, and Dead. And I remember emailing you saying, that's an ominous title. But can you, in the time that we have left, explain what that's going to be about?
Sure. What I want people to realize, too, is while healing is hopeful, there's some studies, adverse childhood experiences. There's a study that came out in the late 90s with Kaiser Permanente, and it was Dr. Folletti and Dr. Anda from the Centers for Disease Control, and they found that people that had 6 or more adverse childhood experiences had an early mortality of 20 years on average. 20 years.
20 years, 6 adverse
childhood experiences.
And can you give an example, like
sure.
Sexual abuse,
physical abuse, a family member in jail, somebody with an addiction, somebody with a mental illness, extreme neglect. So there's many of them.
Wow.
So what this book, Right to Heal, is the second part, is that we're letting people know this does affect you, not just psychologically. People have heart attacks, strokes, arthritis, higher incidences of a whole host of issues. So this is a very real health issue that people, it's not just a personal problem that you need to think differently about. It has health implications that people need to know about.
I believe that.
Self-care has to be prioritized. Healing is a healthful thing, not a luxurious thing, because it will minimize the damage and maintain health as well as well-being. So that's what the book is about. Writing is one way to improve your health if this is your experience, and also to let people know anyone who has these experiences is affected. It's not just that, you know, you didn't handle it better. We're all affected by our childhood experiences, good or bad.
This is fascinating, and I could talk to you all day long on so many levels about this sort of thing, but now we've run out of time, and I really want to thank Christine Cissy White, the founder of Heal Right Now, and Write is spelled W-R-I-T-E, healrightnow.com, and a columnist on the Elephant Journal. I want to thank you so much for being with us today and sharing really valuable insights into healing from the trauma.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and it's wonderful to speak with you. I could keep going too.
Well, maybe we will.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, and we'll see you on the next episode of It's All Right with Suzette.